Governor Ducey.
How are you, Alelia?
Very nice to be with you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm here because I'm on the National Archives Foundation, the home of the Charters of Freedom. So I know all of you have been there.
And thank you for your good work in journalism.
Thank you.
I think it's important that we continually state that a free and fair press is important to a flourishing republic.
Absolutely, and to know our history.
Yes.
So, you are really a pioneer in this area of civics. The very first act that you signed as governor was the American Civics Act bill. What was it that motivated you to do that?
Well, that is sweet of you to say that I was a pioneer on this. I think really what I was maybe an investigative journalist. I knew that this was missing inside our school system. I saw the scores of how our children were scoring on civics exams. We all saw the jokes on Jay Leno, and I think to a certain degree that was funny for a while, and then it became somewhat horrifying. And I was actually at a dinner where Richard Dreyfuss was there and Charles Krauthammer, and they had a debate. And those two gentlemen don't agree on anything, but at the end of it, they said the one thing that they do agree on is civics, and that all of their debate and discussion came from the foundation of our founding documents or the Federalist Papers or amendments of how we had made change in the past by being active inside our government. And I was at the time in a heated primary for governor in 2014, and the next day on the campaign trail, I said, if I'm elected governor, Arizona students will know American history and civics. And there was spontaneous applause in the audience. When I was elected, we worked with the Joe Foss Institute for the American Civics Act. We passed that model legislation, and now it's the law of the land in 31 states around the country.
So how does it actually work? What do the students have to do?
What the students have to do is take the same test that a new naturalized American has to take to become a citizen. So what we saw is civics was in the curriculum inside our schools, but because it wasn't being tested, it wasn't being taught. On this one, I think this is critical that you have this foundation, and I'm sure everyone in this audience has seen the test. It's not a difficult test. I mean, who was the first president? Who is the commander-in-chief? How many branches of government are there? Name them. These types of questions. They're things we can't even remember where we learned them. They were part of our upbringing at home with our coaches, our teachers, and scoutmasters and den mothers. And for whatever reason, it's been pushed out to a certain degree. And because we're not coming from a common set of fundamentals, we see some of the debates we have now where people are just simply talking past each other. They're not listening to what the other has to say and seeing if there's a place to find actually a solution, which we used to call compromise.
So it's really amazing to be at the National Archives or any of the various places around the country where these naturalization immigration ceremonies happen, and you see all of these new Americans who have taken that test and who often know more of the details than people who have grown up in the United States.
And the pride they have in becoming an American, the way they value that citizenship, and you know that they are going to participate, not only the rights that they realize, but the responsibilities that they have in being an American.
So we're now 5 years past the signing of the bill. You're in the first year of your second term. And that's not enough time to really measure the impact, but have you seen any changes? Have you seen aspirations?
Well, I would say the changes that I've seen is that now it's passed in 30 plus states in the country. We're having this discussion in a bipartisan way because it is a bipartisan issue. Sandra Day O'Connor, who is a very proud Arizonan and the first female on the United States Supreme Court, was maybe the first to alert to the crisis. She said this is a quiet crisis in our country. So I think this is something we didn't lose all that long ago. This is not an intractable problem. This is something we can fix. And look at our political environment right now. It's something we must fix. And so there's no time like the present. And I think beginning with civics is the proper place to start, but it's got to be larger than just civics. It's got to be about our citizenship. And that's where I think those naturalization ceremonies are so inspirational, and something that every person who's lucky enough to be born here a citizen should see, to know that we shouldn't take this for granted.
So people pass the test. They take the test starting in 8th grade, and then they can take it over until they finally pass it.
Yes.
So you give people a mulligan and let them come back, because the point is to educate them, and an informed electorate really is very important in a democracy. So I'm just wondering about how students are taught about media literacy. What's the role of the press in this conversation and in this instruction?
It's a good question. I don't know that I could give you the same specifics on media literacy that I could on civics. I do think, and we're the first generation or the first parents to have to deal with, these things we carry in our pockets that we see as great tools of productivity and liberation, and it allows me to be away from the office and be able to get done or communicate all the same things I would be able to do if I were behind my desk in the state capitol. I'm concerned for our young people who haven't developed their values yet, who don't know what credible sources are, that everything on social media has the same weight, and we see some of the distortion that's been put out there purposely on so many of these issues, and it's almost to anger and inflame the debate rather than to inform it.
When students are learning these things, part of the goal is to have them engaged in the political process and the voting process. So how are you encouraging them to register to vote? What are some of the ways that the young people see that they can have a role in this?
Sure. Well, one thing I would say, in this environment, there's no need to encourage the young people to register to vote. They are registering, and they are engaged. And we certainly saw it in this last election cycle on the campus of Arizona State University. I think there was a 4-hour wait to vote. So many candidates were going to work that line. And I think that is a good thing. I don't think you should have to wait 4 hours, but that was the crush of students in comparison to the previous election cycle. Beyond that, what we've worked on in Arizona is really an axiom of, we want it to be easy to vote and hard to cheat. And I think we've been a model state on this in many ways. We don't have election day in Arizona. We have election month. You can vote by mail on a permanent early voter list. And people take advantage of that. I think 70% of our citizens actually vote by mail and are able to participate that way. I'm a little old-fashioned. I've liked to go to my polling place and take my sons and wait in line, especially on the days of a national election, because I think there's just something about that ritual.
Yeah, it is a ritual. And when you can take your children and you can begin to model that for them, then I think that sets a tone. I mean, I know you've thought a lot about civility and the role that civics can play in teaching people how to behave and how to be good citizens, how to compromise, how to be educated. What is it that you think is important for young people to know about civility? I'll just say I heard something on NPR this morning where Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who's a Democrat, and Congressman Doug Collins, who's a Republican, are receiving a Civility in Public Life Award from Allegheny College. So we're trying to model this. So what is it that you tell young people about how they can have conversations with each other when they may have different beliefs?
Well, I am lucky enough to talk to a lot of young people, and there's a lot of smart, engaged, cerebral, excelling high school students that want to volunteer on a campaign or serve in an administration. And when I talk to a lot of these young people, I'll ask, how many of you know your political affiliation today? And it seems like every hand will go up in the audience. And I'll say, how many Democrats, how many independents, how many Republicans? And I encourage them not to put their faith in parties, but to get the best education they can, develop their value system, and then develop their own leadership skills. And that's the best way to influence the debate. We talk about civics, and civics is information, it is knowledge. I think on the civility part of it, and I'm only speaking to myself here, but it's on me to model that. I'm in the public square. I'm very passionate about the things that I want to move forward, but I want to do it in a way where I can go home and hold my head up high at the dinner table and say, we made some ground today, or the argument wasn't good enough and the people have spoken.
So one of the reasons that we're having this conversation today, one of the reasons for this conference, is to encourage business leaders to be more involved, to be more supportive of this. Any suggestions that you have for corporations or for communities who are trying to make sure that they are teaching civics, not just to young people, but to adults who need it as well?
Well, I think that I would really like to encourage chief executives, leaders, influencers, decision makers inside corporations to embrace this. One, you're going to have better civil discourse inside your organization to begin with. Two, there's a discussion that seems to me to be almost anti-free enterprise and anti-market-driven economies. I don't know exactly how this happened, but I think that it shouldn't just be the leaders and the owners and the chief executives. It should be the hardworking employees that realize how special it is that we get in this country the opportunity not only to create the prosperity that we enjoy that allows people sometimes to just leave work and go out and make their voices heard in the public square and petition their government, but that this could go away. I mean, in many ways, this has been one of America's leading exports in terms of freedom and democracy and free enterprise. And we want to make sure that we hold it close at home and that, of course, we can have these discussions in the workplace, but that it shouldn't divide the workplace. I mean, there's got to be a mission and a higher purpose to what we're doing.
So 5 years in, anything that you would tweak when you go back and look at that bill, anything that you would add, or any policy that you think needs to be implemented?
No, there's nothing I would change. I think that if you take the American Civics Act and just apply that undiluted, but I don't think that you can then have the celebration and claim victory. That's then the first step, and I'm so thrilled to see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce engaging here, inviting people of all political backgrounds from across the spectrum. I do think this is something much like Richard Dreyfuss and Charles Krauthammer, may rest in peace, is that we can advocate together on and say, let's have this debate, whatever the hot button political debate of the day is, from this standpoint of that we've got, three separate branches. We have a constitution, the same spirit of our declaration. And then I also think to talk about, I think the toughest question on the civics test is how many amendments are there in the Constitution? And the answer is 27. I committed it to memory because I passed it. The press is always trying to play gotcha, asking me a question off of the exam. But those are 27 amendments that were done through Article 5 of the Constitution. And some of this, sure, we can look to our legislature and our elected leaders, but when they are failing us, there is opportunities to go to the people. I know we've been very effective in Arizona. 92% of the legislation we passed in the last session was bipartisan. We see gridlock and disappointment here in Washington, D.C., but there are other ways to go after issues, and it doesn't have to be by executive order, and if Congress doesn't get it done, there's other ways to approach it, and that is, I think, the best way to have an engaged citizenry, and you couldn't just do that by solely marching. You would have to persuade people as to the positive outcome of your solution and build coalitions.
So you are focused on young people and getting them to take these tests. Have you seen any progress in the legislature? You said bipartisan bills, so are you seeing it sort of trickle up to adults?
Well, I would say in Arizona, although we have all the heated discussion and debate that's necessary in the public square, because I am fortunate enough to have that title of governor, and that is the role of chief executive, so I've gone out of my way to set the tone that we are going to have that discussion. I meet with leaders on both sides of the aisles. I've built relationships with them. That's more my style. That's how I want to do it. And when a fight is over, Haley Barbour taught me very well. He said, Doug, there are no permanent enemies. Break bread, move forward, and that's served me well so far.
So advice for young people who want to get involved in not just running for office, but just in, discourse and community activities and civic life. What things would you tell them?
Well, I do talk about that idea of getting the best education that you can, developing your own values system, and then your network. Your relationships, developing your leadership skills. And I think the best leadership skills are developed in voluntary discussions. I started my career with Procter & Gamble. I couldn't wait till I was finally a manager, then you would have some real authority. And I learned that it was actually the skills I learned in volunteer situations of setting a vision and the goals and getting people to buy in was a much more positive approach. I applied those same things at Cold Stone Creamery, which was the company I built in Arizona. And all of those skills, I also think working with a franchise organization is like a legislature. I mean, they're in business for themselves, but they're not by themselves. You have to work with your franchise community, even if you're the CEO of the brand. And this idea of working with your legislature, I hear some other peer governors that will remain unnamed who like to go after their legislature, in public or with the press. And I always think that might have felt good then, but you're not going to get much done in your state of the state.
Right.
And what I try to do is understand and know what is important to people in the legislature, where we have common ground, and start there. And then, of course, I've got my own agenda that I ran on and I'm passionate about, and I want to move it forward. But I also think that you can do that by building those coalitions and finding where there is some pragmatic compromise that will move the state forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is not hard to argue that we're in a really polarized time. Mm-hmm. So you see what the foundation that you have been laying with this act, and if you look 10 years down the road, what do you hope will have been accomplished? Well,
we were talking about this a little bit backstage. We are in a fever right now, and the fever breaks sooner or later. And I don't think you can ever go back to the good old days, but we certainly can have a much more robust, productive debate that benefits our country and our citizens. The first time I ever came to Washington, D.C., I was 46 years old. And I always say that to young people, and especially political science majors. Go out and get a skill or a subject matter expertise outside of politics if you want to have an influence inside politics. But I think that idea that we bring that type of posture to all different parts of our life. I worry that right now this tone is pushing any good young people out of politics. Are we trading up in our legislatures, or are we trading down? And what we want are citizen leaders that want to run for office and make a difference. I'm enjoying this very much. I always say to my friends who are worried about me that everything's fine, this is a great job, but it's not a job that you have to do your whole life.
So when young people are making that decision about getting involved in politics, what is it that they are learning in the basic civics education?
The basic civics education is basically that exam, and I've seen some of the teachers. I think Lucian from the Joe Foss Institute talked about that application where it's like the interactive Constitution. You can kind of see the articles and the amendments, and you have it from each side. and kind of that debate that informs it. And the best teachers on civics are doing that as well. They're not just giving a rote memorization answer that there's 3 branches and now you know what you need to know about the separation of powers. You know, they're talking about a Federalist 10 and Federalist 45 and Federalist 78, and the Federalist and Anti-Federalist sentiment at the time and what the conclusion was ultimately a compromise between 13 states and some incredible leaders that we revere and that were quite imperfect at the same time.
So you're right, when people don't have that basic literacy, knowing about the 3 branches of government, they don't really understand how things are working. So it's not just at the federal level, it's also at the state level. How are the students being taught about that?
Well, that's what I say in terms of the passionate teachers that we have in the grade school and high school classrooms. And the ones that are doing it the best, we highlight, we celebrate, and we try to use their curriculum. And many times the learning that they've put, because young people some people are learning through video. I'm a big fan of people that like to read. I think there's no better way to learn that way, but we try to provide those options and those choices for young people so that they do have those fundamentals, or at least they've heard it, and some will have a passion for it and want to be involved immediately. I always encourage the political science majors at Arizona State University, U of A, or NAU to get involved in a campaign. Choose a candidate, get involved, volunteer, and I think you'll see how the case is made, and maybe it's something that you begin your career with, or maybe you go on and try other things as well. But that idea of engagement, to me, table stakes is the vote. Is that idea that we participate and that we vote. I think young people have a real grasp on all of their rights, as they should, but with those rights come a responsibility. And I think that has to be part of the culture and the value system of what civics is going forward.
So final question, just you knew that when you signed that bill that something really special was going to happen. Has it met your expectations?
Well, I would say I was hopeful and optimistic. I believe that this is something that we inherited as Americans. It's something that we have to take care of. And as President Reagan said, it is not passed on in the bloodstream. We have evidence of this now, and we can fix this. And we've done this before as a country. Reconstruction. I mean, we have tried to reconstruct the citizenship and involvement and what it means to be an American. So I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility. We have had such good fortune from the years that we've been able to be a part of this republic, and I think we should work as hard as we can to make sure we pass it on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you all of you.